And we have now reached the current timeline of the Halloween series. Today I'm going to be reviewing 2018's Halloween. This is notably the third movie to use the title of just Halloween. First we had 1978's John Carpenter's Halloween, then 2007's Rob Zombie's Halloween, and now we have this 2018's Halloween. This is the final timeline deviation. This movie comes in 40 years after the original movie and the events of Halloween 1978 to pick up. It ignores all other sequels, only acknowledging the original movie, and it brings in some pretty big changes there. The main thing noting is that Laurie Strode is not Michael Myers' sister in this movie. She's just a teenage victim of his attack in 1978 and has no actual relationship. They explain it in the movie, saying that it was just a rumor that got started about her having been his sister. So they do acknowledge it, but it's not there. This is a big upswing in the series. This movie is a great sequel follow up. It was after a long gap. The last movie, Halloween 2 from Rob Zombie, came out in 2009, and we had a long dry spell to get to this one in 2018. And as I record this review, this timeline has been concluded with the release of Halloween Ends. It came out yesterday, and I wanted to get all these reviews done before that one started, but I didn't quite make it. But in the near future, we'll be getting to Halloween Ends as well. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and start taking a look at 2018's Halloween. As always, if you have not seen this movie, please be aware that this review will be containing spoilers. The movie starts out at Smith's Grove Sanitarium. Michael was returned here and has been here for 40 years following the events of Halloween night 1978. There are a team of podcasters who have attempted to come and interview Michael before he's being transferred to another facility called Ice Hill. And they meet Dr. Sartain, who is Michael's new doctor, who's took over taking care of Michael after Dr. Loomis passed away. And he notes that he was a former student of Michael. The doctor takes them out to a courtyard where Michael is chained, having some outdoor time, and they approach, and there's a yellow square warning them how close they can get. Doctor tells them not to get any closer. Aaron tries to speak to Michael and even brought Michael's mask from 1978 and shows it to him. Michael takes a slight glance at it, but other than that, gives no reaction, doesn't turn to him, doesn't look at them, doesn't talk to them at all, and just continues to stand and stare away from them. Other patients in the area seem to be reacting and giving a reaction as the man just continues screaming, asking Michael to talk to him. But their attempt is unsuccessful. So they leave, and their next stop is to try to go interview Laurie Strode. They find her house. She lives behind a gate, a big heavy gate monitored by camera. They buzz her and try to talk to her, and she does let them in after they offer her $3,000 for an interview. They go in and they speak to her, and they note that they are trying to re examine the story of Michael Myers. And she tells them that there's nothing to re examine. Michael is a being of pure evil, and there's nothing more that really needs to be said about it. They upset her by mentioning that she has basically had her whole life affected by the events of Halloween night 1978, including losing her daughter at the age of 12 and never regaining custody. At this point, Laurie gets mad and asks them to leave, but she does collect the money that was promised to her. It is noted in this scene that Michael is being transferred to Ice Hill to be locked away for the rest of his days. You think they would learn their lesson here, of course, but in typical Halloween movie fashion, Michael is being transferred on October 30th to get us ready for him to escape for Halloween Day. We're next introduced to Laurie Strode's family. She has a daughter, Karen, her husband, Ray, and their daughter, Allison. As Allison is headed to school with her friends, she notes that her grandmother was traumatized by the events of Halloween 1978 and that it consumed her entire life. And that's why she lives out in the woods in a house that is very heavily locked and guarded with a big gate out front. She has been preparing for Michael's return for her entire life for the last 40 years. At school, we see Allison's boyfriend and a friend of theirs. They have an interaction. When Allison's in class, we actually get a call back to 1978's Halloween. Allison looks out the window, but instead of seeing Michael standing there staring in, she sees her grandmother. She goes out and talks to her grandmother, and her grandmother gives her the money that she got for the interview and tells her to do something fun with it. And then she says she knows that she might not have done the best job with her daughter, but if she raised her to be safe, then that's okay with her. We see Laurie out at her house having a training session. We see her shooting guns at target practice. She has a whole targeting field of mannequins that she's practicing with many forms of guns to stay prepared. Back to Aaron and Dana, we see them looking over notes of Dr. Loomis's and anything about Michael. And one of the recordings we hear here is that there was a recommendation from Dr. Loomis, and that is notable. He said that Michael should not be reincarcerated. This is in 1979 that this recording was made. He should not be reincarcerated. He should be killed and his body destroyed. And as this is playing, we see Michael being loaded onto a bus to be transferred from Smith's Grove. We see Laurie in her truck in the background watching. She sees Michael get loaded onto the truck. Seems like she wants to attack him, but she chooses not to. She instead goes to where her daughter and family are having a celebration dinner for Allison being inducted into the Honor Society. Laurie comes in. She's visibly upset. She's trying to talk to them. She grabs the husband's glass of wine and starts drinking it. And the daughter says, "This is why we don't invite you around." She sits down, tries to calm down, but she tells them she saw Michael. She calls him the Shape, very notably, and just can't handle it. She eventually gets up and walks out. The granddaughter goes out to check on her, and the mom comes out and says this was her whole childhood living with her mother acting this way, and they all go their separate ways. We next see a father and son on their way to a hunting trip, and on their way, they come across the Smiths Grove bus crashed on the side of the road. The father tells the son, Kevin, to call the police and he's going to go see if anybody needs help. We see patients wandering around the outside. Kevin calls the police and goes to look for his father eventually, taking his hunting rifle with him. He sees an officer who tells Kevin to run, but Kevin goes onto the bus trying to find his father, and he's surprised by Dr. Sartain popping up in the back and accidentally shoots him in the shoulder and runs back to his father's truck, where Michael has hidden in the back seat and kills Kevin. We assume stealing the truck. And next we see Deputy Hawkins at a gas station. He gets a call, reports to the scene, and sees another officer killed, calls it in. He sees the boy's father dead behind the van, and he opens up the back of the bus to find Dr. Sartain, who is in the process of bleeding to death. Now we've arrived at Halloween Day, and Hawkins is at the hospital. Another officer has come to say that they've started rounding up the patients, and Hawkins shows him the manifest from the bus and notes that Michael Myers was on board. And at this point, we learn that Hawkins had been present at the events of 1978's Halloween, and we later find out that Hawkins had found Michael Myers and had stopped Dr. Loomis from killing him after the events of 1978. And we now catch up with Aaron and Dana. They are going around still doing their research. They go to the grave of Judith Myers, and we see Michael lurking in the background. They next stop at a gas station and they're filling up, and we see Michael walk right behind them into the garage. Dana has to go use the bathroom, and while she's in there, Michael has entered the garage and kills the mechanic to steal his usual blue jumpsuit. That's his usual method of getting one of these. He also kills the teller, pulls his teeth out, goes into the bathroom, and drops the teeth over the stall that Dana is in, scaring her. Aaron comes in to try to help, but Michael quickly kills him by slamming his head up against the wall several times, and then he strangles Dana to death. And at this point, Michael has now recovered his mask out of the trunk of these would-be reporters, and now his ensemble is complete. He's got his usual blues jumpsuit, and he's got his original mask back. So Laurie hears on the news that the bus from Smith's Grove had crashed and patients had escaped, so she immediately starts setting to work and getting prepared. She knows that this means Michael might be on the loose. She goes and tries to warn her daughter and her family about the potential danger and tells them they need to be safe and they need to go and try to hunt Michael down, and they don't really want to listen to her at first. We also see her pop up at a gas station when the police discover the murders there, and Hawkins sees her and she sees Hawkins, and they have a bit of a stare down, briefly acknowledging the situation to each other, it would seem. The daughter Allison goes to the dance with her boyfriend and friends, and we actually do see her call her friend who is babysitting and makes plans to potentially see them later in the evening. And we get back to Michael. He's just wandering the streets. It's Halloween night. He's wandering in a mask, so again, he doesn't really stand out on a Halloween street. And then Michael just sets to work doing some killing. He does it very randomly, it would seem, so far. He walks into a house, he grabs a hammer, he kills the lady in there, and steals his usual killing weapon of choice, a rather large butcher knife. And it would seem like maybe that's why he went to this house to get a knife, and that's why he killed this woman, or maybe it was just random, because then he next goes to a house next door or nearby, and he kills another woman by stabbing her through the neck with that butcher knife. Now, we then do go to the house where Vicky is, and we see her waiting for her boyfriend, and she puts the kid she's babysitting to sleep, and her boyfriend does arrive, and they start having some fun, and then they hear a noise. It sounds like a door opening and closing. The boy comes running downstairs and says somebody was standing outside his door looking at him. Vicky goes upstairs with him as Dave steps outside to have a smoke. She looks around the room, says there's nothing here, and as she's about to head out again, he asks her to close the closet door. She goes to close it, but it's getting blocked by something. She tries again, then she opens the door, and Michael's in the closet. The kid runs. Vicky tries to run but slips and falls. Michael catches her, drags her back into the room, and kills her by stabbing. Dave, having heard the struggle, runs in as the kid runs out, and he grabs a large knife of his own and goes to, we assume, intercede. At the dance, we see Allison gets into a fight with her boyfriend and decides to leave the dance. He throws her cell phone into a bowl of punch, so she doesn't have that any longer as she leaves with Oscar. The police arrive at the house that the babysitting was happening on. Hawkins heads in and he begins walking through the house. He finds upstairs Vicky is dead and she was propped up in a chair and a pumpkin in the fish tank. And then Laurie also arrives. She sees Michael in an upstairs window and takes a shot at him and would have hit him, but it was his reflection in a mirror. Michael starts heading out of the house. Hawkins gives pursuit. We see the dead body of Dave pinned up against the wall, stabbed into the wall with a knife holding him in place. And he has a tattoo on his arm of 10/31/18, that day's date of Halloween 2018. Outside, Michael's trying to walk away. Laurie takes a shot and hits him once, and then he continues to move on. She gives chase, but Michael manages to give her the slip here. Hawkins comes up behind her, and they have a little bit of a face off. The police arrive, additional police, along with Dr. Sartain being brought in by the other officer, and he says that he wants to help try to locate Michael. So he has a bit of a face off too. He sees Laurie Strode and says that he's been very interested and read everything about her and Michael since the events of since the events of 1978. He heads off with Dr. Sartain and notes that they can't kill Michael, that he's property of the state, but Hawkins says he'll do what he has to do. And they make a plan that the police are going to take Laurie, her daughter, and her daughter's husband to Laurie's house where they'll be safe, and they're going to try to find Allison. We do see Allison and Oscar making their way down a street, and he says, let's take a shortcut. They cut into a yard. Oscar, thinking that he's developing feelings for Laurie and she's returning them, tries to kiss her. She gets mad and leaves, jumping over the fence, leaving him behind. He's sitting on the yard. The yard has motion sensors in it, and it turns out that Michael was in this yard as well. He chases down Oscar and kills him by stabbing him, and his head comes down and gets impaled on the spike of a fence as he was trying to escape. Allison comes back and sees Oscar dead. She sees Michael and she begins running, and she eventually does find help at a house. They come out and they call the police. Meanwhile, Laurie, Karen, and Ray had arrived at her house, and Allison is with Hawkins and Dr. Sartain making their way there. As they're on their way there, they do spot Michael, and Hawkins runs Michael down. And as he's going to try to finish the job and kill him, Dr. Sartain's gotten in the way. He says Michael's already dead, but when Hawkins gets closer, saying he's going to shoot him anyway, Sartain pulls a knife and stabs Hawkins multiple times. We then find out here that Sartain's kind of gone crazy himself. He says this is what it feels like to be Michael and to have killed. He then puts on Michael's mask. He loads Michael into the back of the police car with Allison and then gets in the car driving, saying that he believes that Michael's still alive to fight Laurie and Laurie's still alive to fight Michael, and he wants to bring them back together. So he starts driving towards Laurie's house. Back at the house, Laurie's getting prepared, blocking down the house. She knows that she thinks Michael is coming, so she's trying to get as prepared as possible. Dr. Sartain tells Allison on the way that for 40 years Michael's never talked to him and he's never gotten to see him in action, so there's a lot of possibilities for this night. She says that Michael talked to her and she'll tell him what he said if he stops the car and lets her go. He stops on the brakes and they're down the road from another police vehicle. Michael wakes up at this point, puts his mask back on, and kicks open the gating to the car. He gets out of the car, and Allison's able to get out and run away through the woods. He pulls Sartain out of the car, and Sartain, laying on the ground, just looks up at Michael and says, "Say something to me." And Michael responds, not by saying anything to him, but by smashing his head by stomping on it with his boot. The other police car down the street sees the other car. They know that it's Hawkins' car, and they start heading towards it to investigate. They get there and they look around. They find the dead body of Sartain, and we see Michael behind them, and Michael kills both of them next. Back at the house, Ray is outside. Look, as when he sees the police car pull up, he goes up, sees the two officers dead, and then Michael kills him next, coming up behind him and killing him. And then Laurie tells Karen to hide in the basement. She sees Michael outside. Now, Michael initially almost kills Laurie right away here. He breaks both his hands through the door. He's choking her, holding her up against the door, but she manages to raise her shotgun up and she actually blows two of Michael's fingers off. And then she too retreats down into the basement through the secret passageway hidden under the counter island in her kitchen. Michael comes in down in the basement. She tries to shoot him through the floor, but that doesn't work. And then she tells her daughter to remain in the basement and she heads upstairs. She starts looking for Michael room to room. And she has a very extreme setup in her house. Each door has a button outside that closes a metal gating so that she can try to close off entryways as she moves through the house. She eventually sees a trail of blood and heads upstairs. She makes it into a room full of mannequins, and she notices that the doors to the outside that she had previously barred are now open. And she notices a trail of blood leading over to a closet. She goes over and finds the dead body of Ray in the closet and then begins looking around the room. Michael pops out from behind one of the mannequins and they have an additional struggle. Michael manages to disarm her from the gun she has and she pulls out a knife and begins to try to stab him with that. Michael overpowers her and stabs her with the knife and throws her out the doors and she falls over the ledge and down the roof and falls onto the lawn. Allison had arrived on the property and comes into the house. She's looking for help. Karen opens the door to the basement and calls her over. Michael looks down on the lawn and Laurie's gone. And Michael moves downstairs looking for where the others went. He goes towards the noise and he opens the counter. He starts trying to bang it. He bangs it open And Karen in the basement has grabbed her gun that she had as a child. She's staring up and she's saying she can't do it, she needs help. Michael appears in the doorway and she seems to have been trying to lure him with a trap. She shoots him once, and then Laurie appears in the background, a callback to the original movie. She appears in a dark doorway where we can only see her face, much like Michael did to her in the house in 1978. And she manages to fight with Michael. They get into another scuffle and she knocks him down into the basement. Karen and Allison make their way up out of the basement. Michael tries to grab them, but she flips a switch that closes a bars that seals the doorway to the basement, and then she tells her daughter that this house isn't a cage as everybody thought all along. It was a trap for Michael. And then Laurie sets off a chain reaction of releasing gas throughout the house. She set this whole house up as a trap to trap Michael if he ever came back, and they ignite the house in flames and it begins burning as they make their way out of the house, down the driveway, and flag down a car. They get into a pickup truck and start driving away towards the hospital. We notice that Allison is still holding the large knife that Michael had had after having fought with him earlier, trying to stab him with it. And we leave with Laurie's house burning down and Michael trapped in the basement. This movie seems to do a lot of things very well, establishing itself as a immediate sequel to the original 1978 film. Michael somehow was recaptured by the Haddonfield police at the end of Halloween night 1978 after he had killed 5 people. He's recaptured and sent back to Smith's Grove. And at this point, Dr. Loomis decides he wants to try to have Michael killed. It doesn't happen. He's locked up, and eventually Dr. Loomis passes away, and a new doctor is assigned to Michael, and that is Sartain. And Sartain is obsessed with Michael for the next 40 years. And it just seems that Dr. Sartain went crazy in that time himself to the point where he was jealous that he didn't get to see Michael in action the way Loomis did. And he wants to try to understand Michael's mind so badly that he's willing to go to a point of killing somebody. And he is willing to go to any point that he can to try to cause Michael to speak, to try to put Michael in a situation where something would happen. He's just stared at Michael sit there and stare at a wall for 40 years. And this is very true to Michael from the original movie. Dr. Loomis in the original movie said Michael, in many ways, was an ideal patient when he was at Smith's Grove. He just sat and stared at the wall and didn't do anything until the day he decided to escape and go back to Haddonfield. And that's what he did again for much longer this time. He just sat in Smith's Grove waiting for 40 years until he saw an opportunity to again escape and go back to killing. An interesting part about that here is that Michael's killing isn't focused. He doesn't seem to be going after anybody in particular. He just goes, he's on the streets of Haddonfield, and he starts going house to house and killing anybody he comes in contact with. And it doesn't even seem like Michael is after Laurie Strode in this movie. She thinks he's after her, coming back for her, and she's prepared for it. But Michael is just going around killing. In fact, Michael doesn't head for Laurie Strode's house. Michael is just wandering around town killing, perhaps catching up for lost time, or perhaps just doing what he does, which is to keep moving and keep killing, as Dr. Sartain says at one point in this movie. And in fact, it's Dr. Sartain who plans to bring Michael to Laurie Strode's house to bring them back together because he believes that they are locked together and that he needs to kill her and she needs to kill him. And he wants to see what's going to happen when they come back together. But that doesn't seem to be Michael's desire in this movie, and that's a very interesting point. It is sad to see that Laurie Strode never really fully recovered from the events of 1978, and those events have kind of molded her entire life from that point forward. It affected her personal life. She had multiple failed marriages. It affected her life as a parent. She spent her whole life trying to prepare her daughter to be safe so that what happened to her would never happen to her daughter, to the point where that her daughter ended up being taken away from her but she still did what she thought was best and prepared her, and it came in handy because all these years later, Michael did come back. And although Michael didn't seem to be targeting her in this movie, he did, of course, go after her once he was back face to face with her. But that could have been said he could have gone after anybody he was put face to face with. That's just, again, the point here. In the original movie, it was seemed that Michael just saw Laurie walk up to the Myers house to drop off the paperwork for her father, and then Michael began following her around town, saw her friends, and targeted them and went and killed many of them that night. And in this movie, it's very similar. He just goes about, as I said, and goes about killing. It wasn't until the 1981 Halloween 2 that Laurie was established as his sister, and that gave him that additional motive for us, for that's why he came to Haddonfield, and that's why he went after her. But this movie takes that away. She's not his sister anymore, and he's just going around killing at random. He's found new random targets, but again, they come face to face, they have another battle, and she manages to trap him and presumably has found a way that she's planned all these years to kill him. Michael in this movie has visibly aged as well. He appears much older. He even appears to be balding, but he is just as powerful and as cold and calculating of a killer as ever. Michael's no fool. He knows what he's doing as he makes his plans around escaping and going around town killing people as he goes. He's on the move, he goes place to place, and he is just back to being a killer. And as Michael always does, he likes to play with the bodies apparently after he kills them, just posing them or propping them up or putting them in little scenes and places. In, like, for example, with Vicky, he propped her up in a chair, covered her with a sheet, put glasses over the sheet, and put a pumpkin in the fish tank next to her. He likes to make little scenes of his victims. One thing that surprised me in this movie, just doesn't seem something like I've ever seen him do in any other movie, is that when he killed the teller at the gas station, he apparently pulled out his teeth, and that's what he drops over the wall of the stall that Dana was in. This is a little bit weird and a little bit more than we've seen Michael do before, but it fits. I mean, he's a crazy, evil, psychotic killer, and I like that this movie keeps that establishment of him. Michael is just a force of nature with one thing on his mind, and that's killing. And even though he had been locked up for 40 years, that was still his focus, and when he got the opportunity, he's back at it. And what I like, as always, is that we don't really need to over explain that. Michael's just evil. He's evil incarnate, and he's out to kill. Michael's mask is very good in this movie. It's modeled after the original mask, and it looks very accurate. And it's meant to be the original mask that Michael wore 40 years prior. And because of that, even though it was stored, it shows aging. The mask looks like it's aged along with Michael. It has cracks in it, and it just looks worn out. Dirt's built up on it, and that's just from being in storage for all these years in evidence. So it does a very good job. I very much like this mask. It's probably the best mask since the original movie. Michael has a pretty high kill count in this movie, killing a total of 18 people throughout the film. He starts off with four off-screen kills that we don't get to see as he escapes from the Smiths Grove bus. He kills the bus driver, two officers, and he kills Kevin's father when he comes to investigate, and then he kills Kevin when he escapes and steals their truck. Next, at the gas station, he kills the mechanic to steal his jumpsuit by beating him to death. He kills the teller by ripping his jaw open. He kills Aaron in the bathroom by bashing his head up against the wall and kills Dana by strangling her. He next kills a woman in her house by bludgeoning her with a hammer. He kills another woman next door by stabbing her through the neck with the knife. He kills Vicky by stabbing her in the child's bedroom. He kills Dave by stabbing him and pinning him up against the wall with a knife. He kills Oscar by stabbing him in the back, and his head gets impaled on the gate spike. And he kills Dr. Sartain by stomping his head with his foot. He kills the two police officers, Officer Richards and Officer Francis. He cuts the throat open of one using Dr. Sartain's penknife, and he decapitates the other and turns his head into a sort of weird jack-o'-lantern. And finally, he kills Ray, Laurie's daughter's husband, by strangling him with a chain. This movie is actually the best received movie by both critics and audiences since the original 1978 Halloween film. On Rotten Tomatoes, it got a 79% fresh score by critics and a 71% fresh score by audiences. Over on IMDb, it got a 6.5 score by audiences, which I think is lower than it deserves. I think this movie was a very strong and powerful return to the franchise, and I score this movie at a high 8.5 out of 10. So, this is my review of Halloween 2018, and this is a very strong return to the franchise. This franchise has struggled with a lot of different sequels, different timelines, even different universes, you could say, and it has struggled with a lot of continuity and consistency issues because of that. And so the decision to just scrap everything and go back to the original movie and just pick up 40 years later from that was a good decision in this case, and it paid off well. This movie was very well done, and I look forward to seeing how this current timeline comes to an end. Next movie I'll be reviewing will be 2021's Halloween Kills, and shortly following that, wrapping up this timeline with 2022's Halloween Ends. I hope you enjoyed this review. Please let me know in the comments your thoughts on 2018's Halloween. Thanks for listening. Please be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel and keep an eye out for the next video coming soon.